Jake, welcome back to the show, man.
Oh, appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. So we were just talking off the air, and you were on maybe a year and a half ago, and we were discussing largemouth bass tracking. Um, and
That
I
was a
was
fun project.
do what?
That was a fun project.
Yeah,
Real.
I was fishing on Boat Arc the other day with the guide, and he said it was super cool. Like Jason caught a 17 pounder out of Ivy a couple years ago, year and a half ago maybe, and he said he could go back and through Texas Parks and Wildlife's genetic testing see that the fish he caught was the offspring of a lunker out of a different lake who was the offspring out of a lunker out of another lake.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. The investment that you guys have made and just the technology to be able to look, basically just pull a couple scales off of a fish because he caught a 10 pounder on
That
Boat
day,
Arc.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
saw some posts he made of with y'all out there, and that's like, yeah, it's cool to see, and that lake's really turning on.
Yeah. Oh, he took a lot of flack because he was the guide, and my
Yeah.
dad didn't catch it, and I didn't catch it.
Yep.
Um, but it was cool to see it, and potential lake record at the time. I think it'll be broken again this spring.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
but that lake has only been open to fishing for like a year. I think last April it opened.
Around, yeah, I guess it was last April. Not long,
Yeah.
and
And he
they're growing
typically
quick.
fishes Fork and Ivy, and he said he's going to invest everything on Boat Arc. He thinks it's going to be the next Lake Fork.
Yeah. I actually, I saw him at the Bass Classic for a little bit and gave him some flack, saying, "Are you ever going to come back to Fork?" But I get it with Bodark where it's at. Putting
Yeah.
some time in there will pay off.
Mm-hmm. So where are you at today?
I'm at my office in Tyler, so sorry for the backdrop here. My office is honestly phenomenal. It's this nice, great big windowed room, which is good, and except for doing interviews like this, it can kind of slow. You get a lot of glare.
Hey, no worries. So, what are your responsibilities as a district supervisor with our inland fisheries department?
Sure. So we've got a 7-person crew here. We cover 14 counties. And big picture, we manage all public water in those 14 counties. That ranges roughly, let's say, all the way up to Pat Mays, north of Paris. Um, Luckily, I don't get quite to DFW, but we get right next to it. So we've got Fork, Twaukene, Cooper above there, Richland Chambers, Cedar Creek, all the way over to Navarro Mills, which is practically in Waco, and then everything back over this way. So lots of really good waters. And I always say we manage the public waters. So at the end of the day, we want to make fishing as good as it can be. We want to keep our anglers happy.
Uh,
I know some folks would argue that's not the case at all, but it is. At the end of the day, my job is to make anglers happy, make them have success or whatever they define success as. And
hmm.
a lot of work goes into that.
And I'll say this: like I've had a great relationship with Texas Parks and Wildlife over 15 years of doing this, but I think you guys right now, in my opinion, are doing a better job than the hunting side of things. Like I've taken a lot of issue with the way they're managing stuff in recent years, but I never have any like real issue with what our inland fisheries department is doing, and I think that you guys do a great job of. I mean, like all of the research that you guys are doing. Well, like the fact that we could catch essentially third generation offspring of a sharelunker in a reservoir twice removed, is amazing, and that's because of the stocking program. So, I think you
Uh,
guys do a great job for the anglers, and I certainly appreciate it, and I see it when I'm out on the water.
I appreciate that. Truthfully, the stocking and the genetics, people still want to not really give it the credit that's needed in places for what you said, that there's quality, probably 10 plus pound fish in lakes all over this state, which that's, you can't claim that many places. And the work that's been put in over decades, you can really see showing out finally. And some of that's just our geneticists and our testing to really pinpoint the genetics are really highlighting more how many of these fish are descendants of fish that were stocked at one point or bred and then subsequently stocked. It's definitely, it's good to work for this state right now. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, and so we just said Bodark opened last April. so
Mhm.
recreational fishing. And I think I read somewhere that they started stocking it in 2019, like
Yep.
shortly after it was impounded. Or I probably were stocking the ponds before it was ever impounded.
Yep. All of the above. They tried to kind of give it that the fork approach. Fork obviously turned out phenomenal and for several reasons, but they tried to set it up to have success quickly. Exactly that, stocking it well before it's open to the public. The ponds that were on that watershed, putting fish in there and letting those fish grow several years and spawn several more years. So when the lake's flooded, you don't just have 1 to 2 pound fish, but you already have some 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and now 10 pound plus fish in that lake already.
Uh-huh. And how big or how much we're all concerned with weight, right? With largemouth bass. We don't want to catch that 13 pounder.
Oh, of
Like double
course.
digits, awesome. But I mean, that's the holy grail is to catch a legacy class sharelunker. How how big do these fish grow every year? Like how many pounds can a largemouth really add from one year to the next, from one spring to the next spring?
Yeah, and it varies so much, to be honest. There's so many factors that can go into how crowded the lake is with fish already. Of course, the nutrient levels, how fertile it is, and then the forage base, water temps, everything else. So there's been situations where we've seen 8 pound fish in 2.5 years.
Mm,
So that's best case scenario, and that's under intensively managed, superior genetics put in, everything else. On if you looked at it on average, and it depends on their time of life as well. A pound or so a year is probably not irrational at all. Let's say our Lake Fork's a good example. To get to that slot that's 16 inches on the bottom side, you're looking at 2.5 years or so, maybe 3 years. Most of those 10 pound plus fish in our public lakes usually are 10 plus years old. Now, Bodark, or we have lakes that are going through a new lake effect or brand new lakes, the growth rates are just simply going to be faster. So you see some crazy things happen like what you're seeing at Bodark.
uh-huh. Okay. Obviously, you work closely with our largemouth bass. What other species do you deal with regularly?
Sure. So we essentially all sport fish within that same range. So catfish, crappie, white bass, hybrid striped bass, uh, pure stripers, all sport fish. Pretty much all the fun things that people fish for are
Uh-huh.
are mostly what our focus is, and then everything else, of course, sunfish and all that. To me, that's forage.
Yeah.
Most situations, that's just bait for our big fish to eat. But so we manage all fish within a water body. Largemouth is my passion, and of course, it's also what pays the bills for this as well. I mean, that's what people really come to this state for. But we really do have so many great fisheries. Crappie is, I think, underrated at times. People don't realize how good of crappie lakes we have.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it's like whitetail deer on the hunting side of things. Like, and big bucks and big bass is kind of what Texas is known for. And when I was on OHIV last year, dude, there were guys from Missouri that were just like, we're just here for a week. We just want to catch a sharelunker. Like, we can't do that
Oh,
in
it's
Missouri, you know? It's like,
yeah, and we get that all over. I don't know if you knew this. I'm a transplant, as I say myself. So I grew up in the Midwest. I used to be one of those pilgrims that would come down and fish fork for a week, traveling out of, I claim Missouri. Truthfully, I grew up in Illinois,
mm,
but I was one of those folks. We'd come down and stay at Fork for a week and fish it before I ever was out of school or had a job.
wow.
So it,
Okay.
it pulls people from all over. And yeah, it's not just Fork, it's Ivy now. And there's so many, the Rayburn and Toledo area, it draws crowds from all over.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And you can't underestimate the financial impact that has as far as bringing revenue into the state, and not just from fishing. I mean, the local hotels, or like what you did on Fork, you're paying somewhere to stay there for a week. They've got restaurants. All of these businesses are kept afloat by angler dollars.
Oh, it's massive. I mean, people don't realize that. We've done some studies to look at that, not just the creel surveys where we ask the basic questions of what did you spend fishing that day, but then we've had folks extrapolate that to look at the overall impact to the economy. And, one was done on Fork decades ago now. And at that point, it was valued at a $40 million a year economic impact around Fork. just for that lake, 40
Yeah.
million
Wow.
annually. And who knows what that's at now, just with cost
Yeah.
of everything going up.
Uh-huh. Well, you mentioned crappie, and that's what I want to talk about today. It's always fun to talk largemouth, but like you said, crappie, under kind of an underrated game fish.
Yep.
Um,
It's growing, truthfully. I mean, we see that the tournament trails, the pressure, everything. There's definitely a growing interest in crappie, and what I say a lot now, trophy crappie. We see more and more people interested in catching trophy or 2 pound plus crappie. That's their focus.
uh-huh. I was probably, gosh, it's probably been 7 or 8 years ago now. But Paulo Beer is a legendary Texas crappie angler.
Okay.
Um, and he actually lives right next to Ray Roberts, but he always went to Fork to go crappie fishing. And he invited me to tag along one time. Dude, we were catching, I mean, every crappie that we caught, and this is before live scope, which we're going to talk about today. I
Mhm.
mean, everything was 2.5 pounds. It was
Yeah,
insane.
nuts.
Yeah.
It really is. I for one, Fork's been ranked in the top 5 nationally for crappie lakes for several years now. It's I always said it's a blessing and a curse. Sometimes that much attention, you get fishing pressure can take its tolls, but overall, it's a world class crappie fishery that just gets overshadowed by trophy bass so often. But it
Yeah.
it's crazy how many 2 pound plus crappie live in that
Oh,
lake.
yeah. Well, live scope has, or forward facing sonar, whatever you want to call it, has gotten it's gotten a lot of attention over the past couple years, and rightfully so, as it's changed the game in bass fishing and also crappie fishing, though probably not nearly as much publicity on the crappie side of things. My introduction to live scope was actually on Lake Fork with Jerry Hancock,
Yeah.
another guide, and my dad and I went out with him. I had rented a property of his to whitetail deer hunt on, and I was like, Jerry, I leased it for 1 year, and it was right here in Collin County. So big bucks, right? It was when we were starting to see all these 200-inch deer pop up. Um, and it was very expensive, and it was only 20 acres. And I was like, Jerry, I'm not leasing it next year. The neighbors were just too much of a headache. They had dogs that one of the neighbors had 3 labs. They didn't keep them pinned up, and you're trying to hunt. I had a 180-inch buck on camera, and I get a picture of the buck, and then 2 minutes later, here's the damn dogs. I
Yeah.
was like dealing with that. One day I was sitting in a tree stand, and I hear all this racket from the neighbor's property, and the trees it's obscured my view of what's going on. Then all of a sudden I see a hot air balloon right above my tree stand. Yeah,
That's not something you see. Yeah.
another time I just had some random dude and his husky take the lid off my feeder, just like maybe it was some California transplant, and
Wow.
he was just like, "What is this? Is this like a from outer space? Like,
Yeah,
take
it's
tons of
a
photos of
spaceship.
this guy." And he was just, I don't think he was like being malicious, but he had no idea what it was. It was very clear. He was like, "What is this thing?" And he's like looking at it, and I'm like, "First of all, you're trespassing."
Yeah, yeah. Step
Uh,
one.
yeah, but anyway, I was like, I'm not gonna renew the lease, Jerry, and I really don't want to take my tree stands down. It's just a I was like, how about you keep the tree stands and you just take my dad and I crappie fishing? He's like, deal.
Absolutely.
So he got a couple nice tree stands out of the deal, and he took dad and I out on Fork. And I think it was in February,
Hmm.
and he told me, he's like, dude, Cable, this live scope has changed the game for me. I went from guiding crappie about 6 months out of the year to where I just do it year round now. Like I'm
Yeah,
booked up until I say I want a day off. I have a trip. He's like,
yeah,
because I can find them any time of year, no problem. And we caught a bunch of big crappie, and that's when I was like, first, literally looking at live scope on the screen. You see the fish, put your bait in front of it. You could see the fish come up to the bait, and you know when to set the hook. He's like, all right, now. And it's like
yeah,
video game fishing, right?
yeah.
Uh,
It's, of course, that's what folks call it. But
yeah. It's super cool, and the technology is not going anywhere. The genie's out of the bottle, um, but it certainly has changed things. Would you say that we're seeing more 13 or even double-digit quality bass being caught as a result of it?
oh, absolutely. I don't think Ivy, which really kind of brought attention to this whole new way of fishing, I don't think that happens without this technology.
Yeah.
And of course, it's brought the attention of, hey, we can catch fish when it's 40-degree water temps out that are out in the middle of the lake. We can go put a bait right in front of them now, and sometimes they're a lot dumber than people think when they're in that situation until they get pressured all day, every day. But still, none of that happens. And like you said, people now have really realized what this technology, how they can use it, how they can harness it. And yeah, without a doubt, these fish are there, but people are finding them. They're putting baits in front of them more consistently.
Yeah. Well, and a good guide or any angler that's familiar with live scope can literally look at a fish and be like, that's a double digit.
Yeah.
And they know. And they're like that, or they'll be like, that is an absolute hammer. We got to try to catch that fish. It's like, to me, it looks like a blob, but the guys that look at the screen all day can tell you, he's like, no, we're not going to throw it that one. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That one's,
Yeah. Or even which way to put your bait, depending on which way the fish is facing. I mean, it's impressive technology.
Yeah. So let's discuss this recent study. Let's talk crappie here that you guys just published. And thanks to Isaiah, or I guess does he work for you specifically in your department?
No, I think he's at our A.E. Wood hatchery, I believe. So
Okay. Yeah.
he's down there in San Marcos. I think we sent this information out to the whole division not too long ago. So some folks probably didn't even know some of the work and research that we've been putting in. And it was like, this is a big enough topic. We need to have this as kind of a mass information to our division. And so that's how he saw it. And I think reached out to you then.
Yeah. So he was a listener of the show before I think he might've been in high school and then went to college, got a degree in wildlife management, focusing on fisheries. So now he's with Texas Parks and Wildlife. So thanks to Isaiah for sending this over to me and then hooking us up. But it's this study that you guys just wrapped up and published the results of focuses on the use of live scope and crappie, right? Mm-hmm. So first of all, why were you guys concerned enough to do this research?
Sure. And truthfully, this one goes back to 2019, 2020 even. So really when live scope really kind of came onto the scene, I would even say early on, people didn't care about it in bass at all. It really was. I think the crappie anglers really picked up on it sooner. And we had anglers and guides from all over them. Jerry and lots of guides on Fork and around saying, hey, we've got to do something. This technology is scary. They're going to harvest every fish out of the lake. We're going to wreck the populations. We're going to ruin the fishery. And it's one of those, we at face value, just knowing some basic population growth tendencies, everything of our crappie around here, our first answer was, it's fine. I mean, I know it's not easy to trust us, but based on how crappie grow, based on how long they live, everything else, it's fine. But luckily we're kind of a science first agency. We like to have data to really give out the right information. So we were able to start a study, and it was a super simple concept. I mentioned creel surveys earlier for a second. We just included one question to our creel surveys, which we do all over the state.
Well, define creel survey.
Yeah, exactly. So it's an angler interview. It's something we go out on our lakes or at boat ramps and we ask anglers a set of questions. What were you fishing for today? How long did you fish? How much money did you spend on this trip? Are you in a tournament? And then, of course, the important stuff. What did you catch? What did you keep? What size were they? All of that. So it gives us a really good snapshot for a given lake, how the anglers are utilizing it. Everything about it, how much they
receptive? Like, I've never been approached for one of these, but
yeah. I've been here a little over 12 years now. Like I said, our district, we do creels year round, depending on the lake. I can count on less than one hand how many times I've had an angler not want to talk. And I can't honestly think of a time where I still didn't get an answer from them, and not in a bad way where at the end of it, if they don't have the time or don't want to, it's optional.
Right.
But you can usually get the survey done in 30 seconds. If they're in a big hurry, I mean, you can boom, 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 boom. Thanks. Have a great day. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty easy. And so with that, we included one more question. It's just, did you use forward facing sonar live scope, whatever, again, whatever you want to call it. Did you use that during your trip today? Yes or no? And so again, super simple to add, and that gave us the ability to tease out all of that information. So the angler catch rates, the harvest rates, the size of the fish they're catching, you could split it out and look at folks not using the technology and folks using it and see if there are differences.
Mhm. And so, what lakes were a part of the study?
Sure. So there's a few different components. The published literature, we actually looked at just what, 3 reservoirs total, Fork, Pines, and Rayburn. Collectively across the state for like the position paper we developed then and some of the other information, there was 10 plus lakes. It was kind of an optional situation for any of the districts. It's like, hey, if y'all would like to get this information as well and be included, here's what you have to do. It's super simple. So again, we had over 10 lakes around the state and kind of a good representation from not just East Texas, not just Central or West, but lakes from all over to look and make sure there wasn't differences around the state in that capacity. And overall, there wasn't.
Hmm.
We had a few outliers, Rayburn being one that was wild, that there wasn't really a difference between anglers using live scope and people fishing traditionally. Catch rates, harvest rates, they were, if anything, I think catch rates were higher for folks not using it. I'd have to go back and look.
Huh. Okay.
And I always, my first take was, well, Rayburn's a brush pile heavy lake. And it's, yes, live scope helps even on brush piles, but when they're on brush piles, you can catch them pretty good without having live scope. And so that's just a speculation, to be honest. But
But in the other lakes, did anglers using live scope catch more fish?
yeah, they did. Like the answer, that side of it, it confirmed what people would have guessed. Their catch rates were higher, their harvest rates were higher, but there were some good take homes as well. One being that they also released fish at a much higher rate. So that's one thing to.
That's a key component there, and I think that's a good job of these dudes in the fishing community policing itself. Right? They know that the technology gives them an edge over traditional fishing methods, and so they don't. To me, that just says we're not abusing this. We're trying to protect the resource, and that's an interesting thing as a guide. Can you convince your clients who are paying you to not keep their 25 fish a day?
Sure.
But I think that conversation is taking place.
Well, and it during that same time frame, really, it was around, I'm going to say 1920, there were several guides that were kind of pushing and advocating for, hey, we're just going to keep 20 per angler per day because we're concerned about this. And again, our response was, well, if y'all want to do that, that's perfectly fine. I get it. And it's a conservation positive message, but I'm telling you, you can't harvest down the crappie in most of our lakes. You just can't physically do it. And luckily we have that data now as well. So we collected all those creel surveys, we looked at catch rates and harvest rates, but we took it a step further and we're able to look at essentially model the populations based off of these inflated catch rates or harvest rates, knowing where we're at with this technology. What would the population look like down the road, long term, and what would they really have to harvest before we saw a change in the population? And that, I mean, if you want me to jump ahead, the big take home on all this, the one I always love to tell people, most of our lakes, anglers would have to harvest almost 80% of all 10-inch crappie in the lake before you ever saw a decline in crappie abundance.
Really?
Yep. And I mean, that's
annually.
80% of 10-inch and larger crappie, not just 80% of crappie, but 80% of legal length 10-plus-inch crappie annually before you saw a population downturn.
So they reproduce that prolifically.
Absolutely. And that's one of the big take homes. I'll tell you some of that of why, before we even had that data, why we were telling anglers it shouldn't be an issue. And here's why. Crappie on average in Texas, their average lifespan is 3 to 5 years. Whether you harvest them or not, whether they ever see an angler or not, they're out of the system on average in 3 to 5 years. They reach 10 inches in about 1.5 years, give or take.
Wow.
White crappie can be even faster. White crappie often reach 10 inches in 1 year. Black crappie can be a little closer to 2. They just grow a little slower. But
I was going to ask you, that was a note I had here. So do we have more white or black crappie, and then what are there really any differences? I mean, you're fishing for crappie. You
Yeah, oh,
don't know.
yeah.
Live scope's not telling you, oh, that's a black crappie, that's a white crappie.
No, there's some differences though. If I had to guess, I would say we have more white crappie total in the state, and that's just because white crappie can practically live in a pothole on a country road. They're really hardy. They can handle turbid water. They can reproduce almost anywhere. Black crappie really thrive where there's vegetation, and we
Hmm.
don't have vegetation around the entire state. And you can even see that on some of our lakes that vegetation is doing this. You'll see ups and downs in the black crappie population that coincide with more or less vegetation in the lake.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, and as a whole, white crappie will get bigger, especially in the south. They
Yeah.
just the bulk of your 2 pound plus crappie, especially 2.5 plus, are going to be white crappie. Um, I always, if you're just looking at it for table fare, it's not like that in every lakes, but in a lot of situations, the black crappie are just a thicker bodied fish, so you have better fillets. They're a
Hmm.
little heavier per length, but maximum size white crappie get a little bigger.
Uh-huh. Okay. Um, but the takeaway is live scope's not affecting
No,
our crappie fishery whatsoever.
exactly. And the only caveat that I always tell people is, there's and the data confirm this, they could potentially impact the abundance of true large crop.
Hmm.
Because again, most of those are going to be 5+ years old. They take longer to get there and there's fewer of them. So there is a chance to reduce the overall abundance of your 15 plus inch, 14-inch crappie. That's that's a potential. Um, doesn't guarantee it'll happen. And some of that's going to, again, it's going to cycle naturally because you mentioned crappie are so prolific when they spawn, and it can be very boom or bust. You can have a bad year class or two, but then you could have, when the conditions are right, they can sustain an entire population in one spawn for several years.
What are ideal conditions?
Oh, stable water, good habitat, ample forage, and stable water levels and temps. When I
So
say
like
that,
drought is bad, just like quail.
yeah, absolutely. And if you if you just have stable water during that spawning window, even it's not as bad. And water temps can really play a factor as well. And Lord knows we have bipolar weather in Texas, but
Hmm.
the more stable, the less variation you see in water temps. So they're not dropping 10, 15 degrees at a pop after, we don't hit 60 degrees and drop back to 40, which can happen. Those are going to impact the spawn more than if you have relatively stable water levels and just a typical up and down, but kind of rising water temps. And especially if you have any shoreline cover at all, it's you're going to have a good spawn 90% of the time.
Yeah, we caught some black and white crappie accidentally out on Bodark the other
Mm-hmm.
day. I was super
Yep.
aggressive during the spring. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
big, big bass lures, and they're just like, I'll take a whack at that,
Yeah. Especially when you get large crappie, you're pushing 14 or 15 inches or 2 pound fish. I mean, they're predators. People don't realize how big their mouths are and what they'll eat.
Hmm,
I
yeah,
mean, I've caught them on 10 XDs at times. I mean,
yeah.
they're not afraid to eat a big bait.
The biggest bass I've caught was 10-2-3. Caught it out of a little local lake here in McKinney, and it was during the spring spawn, and I'm just fishing from the bank, and I'm flipping a 10-inch plastic worm, green worm,
Mhm.
and I hit back to back 2 pound crappie, and I was like, well, that's fun, and I'm not keeping them, and I wouldn't eat anything out of this lake. And I threw him
Mhm.
back in the third cast, whomp, and I was like, oh, that's a catfish. It's got to be a catfish.
Yeah.
And then it jumped, and I was like, oh my god! I was like, Lord, please, please don't let this fish come off. And
Yeah.
I ended up catching it, and then and I've told this story before. I had to it up, and my scale was corroded. The batteries had rusted out. I hadn't caught
Mm.
anything in such a long time that was worth weighing. This one was obviously. So I drove to Cabela's, bought a scale. Oh, first I drove to 7-Eleven, bought some batteries, and then realized the scale was done.
Toast.
So then I had to drive to Cabela's and buy a new scale, and then went back and weighed the fish and let her go. Speaking of letting her go, do you think that a lot of crappie, say guides and anglers are letting the 2 pound, 2.5 pound fish go. I mean, not in a tournament, obviously, but if you're just out for the day, like it's kind of the same mindset for me. I'd be like, well, that's a trophy. Let's let it go.
Sure. And that's truthfully, you see a lot of variation in that as well. And
Mm.
luckily our regulations support it. And it's up to the guide and really up to the clients or, whatever
Yeah,
they
sure.
agree on.
There's no right or wrong answer.
There really isn't, but I get asked that question a lot about especially crappie and that, well, people used to always believe that, oh, those really big ones, those are your brooders, those are the ones supporting the population and everything else. And I continually say, really, they're not for
Mm.
several reasons. One, a 10-inch crappie most of the time has reached sexual maturity and it's going to start producing eggs. There is a lot more 10-inch crappie in a lake than there are 14 or 15-inch crappie.
Mm-hmm.
So by sheer volume, there's more eggs produced, viable eggs, and more fish produced from those 10 to 12-inch crappie per year than the 14, 15 plus inch crappie. Even if those larger fish carry more eggs, you're still your total number of eggs produced in a year are going to come mostly from those smaller fish. And the second thing, let's get back to how long a fish lives. If your average lifespan for a crappie is 3 to 5 years, when you're catching a 2 pounder, it's pushing 5 years plus already. It's at the end of its life regardless.
Mm.
So you can let it go for the concept of spawning or the concept of it's a trophy.
Doesn't
It
really
may
matter.
provide a benefit to someone else. It very well may be close to toast regardless.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
So really, catch and release crappie fishing, not even comparable to the bass side of things.
It's really not, because there is, even with bass, there's a certain point where they're at the end of their lifespan, but they do on average live and can live a lot longer. Like I say, most of our double digit fish are pushing 10 years.
Mm.
There's been fish age, gosh, what was Dottie in California? I'm gonna say 18 or 20 plus years. Again, different situation, but fish in Texas can 10 to 13 years isn't uncommon at all.
Well, Ethel
So
lived to be well into her teen, maybe 20. I don't remember.
something crazy. Yeah.
Of
And
course,
again,
we're
that's
talking
it.
about Mark Stevenson's fish that
Yeah.
really jump started the whole Sri Lanka program back in, I forget what year he caught that
Oh
in.
gosh, don't. I'm terrible with history of even types that interest
I
me
think it
like
was
this. It was
late 80s, maybe early 90s. I had
not,
Mark
yeah,
on one time. We did an interview about that whole situation. Of
yeah,
course, I think Ethel, I don't remember if she's still second, but Barry St. Clair has the current state record. Actually caught that fish, which was over 18 pounds on fork crappie fishing.
yep.
Yeah.
It's no surprise. I mean, that's been,
With a minnow.
yeah, that's a common phenomenon all the time. Whether you're catching it with a minnow or whether you're reeling in a crappie, and an 8+ pound bass blasts the crappie as you're reeling it in. Regardless of those big fish on fork in the wintertime can really key in on crappie.
Mm.
It's a big meal, lots of protein.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Ethel, of course, going back to Mark Stevenson's fish, that's the one that Johnny Morris ended up getting and taking to the original Bass Pro Shops in Missouri.
Yeah.
And I don't remember how many millions of people went to go look at Ethel, but it was, I mean, let's just say that Bass Pro Shops was living rich while Ethel was alive.
That's a cool story. It is.
Yeah.
And yeah, Ethel was fat and happy.
Kind of put Texas on the map though, as a destination for trophy bass fishing, and we've just seen that continue and grow. There's no doubt. Like Texas, probably number one. I mean, Florida and California have great bass fishing as well.
Sure, I'm biased, of course, now, but of course I would obviously say it's how can you argue with what Texas has as a whole? Again, you can go
Yeah.
all over the state and catch a double-digit bass,
Yeah.
and it's been that way for a while. That makes me even think, talking about Ethel and how long ago it was, how it put it on the map. I think we forget just how good we have it now.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last several, it's been that way for decades, and it's just kind of the
I mean,
standard
I can
now.
go catch a 10-pounder out of a little 8-acre lake
Yep.
basically in my backyard. Like I mean, for me, that was the biggest bass I've ever caught. But the fact that I can go catch that in a small reservoir, other states don't have that.
No, we have everything going. Truthfully, we have, of course, we're in a great climate. We have the right temperatures for it, but then our lakes are just very well managed. We have the genetics is just such an important factor. And if we were still stocking traditional northern strain largemouth, you wouldn't see what we have. I mean, we would still see 10-pound bass. We would still see 12-pound bass occasionally, but nothing like this. You wouldn't be where an 8-pounder is sometimes not even, people don't even take a picture of an 8-pounder because they're common in places.
Right. I still would.
Yeah, same. Absolutely. But so that's an exaggerated
I'm no
point,
snob.
but an 8-pounder for some folks on the right lake, that's a weekly occurrence.
Sure.
And
Where a lot of
that's
northern guys are like, "Oh, I caught a 6-pounder. It's a fish of a lifetime."
yeah.
And it is, and it's like you shoot a 115-inch whitetail in the Florida swamps, and that's the buck of a lifetime. It's all relative to where it is. Not knocking anyone's accomplishment whatsoever, but it would have been super interesting to have found out like the DNA of a 10-pound bass out of a 8-acre lake in McKinney, Texas.
Yeah. You'd be surprised how often the Florida genetics just work their way into some of our systems too.
Mm.
There's, I don't always say life finds a way to, Jurassic. My son's watching a lot of Jurassic Park right now, so it's in my head. But just their life does find a way, and the genetics just slowly spread. Of course, there's ways to help it, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, other than the main takeaway that live scope is not going to affect crappie populations in Texas, whether you keep them or let them go, doesn't matter. Was there anything else that you found super interesting or noteworthy that this research project revealed?
sure. Few little tidbits. Just again, I kind of highlighted how much, for one, how the release rates for folks using the technology, how often they release fish at a much higher rate. And even in some situations, the amount of total harvest on the lake, it's heavily skewed towards live scope users, but that's not to knock it at all. It's just highlights the technology, and also probably how common it is now as well. We see, I'm going to say now 60-70% plus of our anglers on some of our lakes, so they're all using it.
Mm.
Some people are just more experienced at it than others, but overall it does increase the efficiency for catching crappie. There's no denying that, but big picture, it's not an issue. I could say even, there's that published paper came out of it, but maybe you saw as well the actual position paper. So or discussion of a position paper, sorry. We've done it in a few situations now as the division adopts a true position paper that essentially comes out and says, on this topic, here is our stance, here is how we handle the situation, et cetera, et cetera. We did one for hydrilla, actually, not too long ago. And this was kind of the next big picture topic. So this whole project started with the idea that we'll develop a position paper on it. And I guess another big take home is, we presented all this information, really looked at it, and at the end of it, everyone agreed we don't need a position paper at this point. I think the information's out there enough. Most people are realizing as well that this is not impacting our populations, and we don't see a concern with it. To have a position paper specifically at live scope and crappie just isn't necessary at this point.
Okay. Last question, $1 million question.
Mm-hmm.
This is controversial. Do you think live scope should be allowed in tournament fishing?
Oh, great question. I don't even have a solid opinion. If you want, I mean, I like the idea of right now, and we'll see if the industry supports it. You have options overall. NPFL or they don't allow it. So if you really are against it, you still have a platform to go fish and make a comparable amount, promote your products, everything else. You've got the good in between with MLF right now and BASS still allowing it.
But MLF does have because that's a period structured tournament, and I think they do have one period which you
where
can't
they allow
use
it. Yeah, it's honestly, it makes it fun to watch. It just puts a whole different skill level on the subject. But to say just yes or no, should it be allowed? I don't have a problem with it. I think it makes perfect sense for each tournament group to make that decision. And ultimately it should be based, honestly, it's a business decision, not a conservation decision right now.
Yeah.
What, as a business, what makes more sense for their business to grow or to thrive?
I don't
And
know
that's
though. I
something.
think I don't. I guess the fans ultimately will dictate. If they stop watching because they don't like live scope, well, that'll
Yep.
tell you which direction you need to go.
And again, that's it. I agree. It's comes down to that business model more than anything else. Conservation wise, I've been asked this question a lot as well, and I can confidently say I don't have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best way to put it. It's the technology is such a different component to how fisheries have been managed. Um, it's never going to be a concern with bass and harvest. Obviously, people don't harvest bass very much anymore. Does it impact catch rates long term? I think that, in my opinion, that's the big question, and there's not a overnight answer for it. That are we fishing for bass that a lot of times a big chunk of the year weren't seeing angling pressure because they were out in no man's land or they were suspended or they just weren't in traditional areas, and now anglers are fishing for them year round. Does that change catch rates? I There's no way of knowing. There's people that are concerned about more large fish being weighed in tournaments with this technology, and is that going to impact things? Another great question, to be honest. A whole other soapbox to get on probably, and that I think highlights fish care more than anything else. The technology itself isn't maybe causing it, but fish care, live well practices, things of that nature. How are they improved or how are they handled? I think that's more what the focus should be on there.
Uh-huh. Well, interesting stuff. And we do have liberal limits, right? 25
Mhm.
fish, 10-inch
Yep.
minimum. And you look at what's happened on the coastal fishery side of things, where we've had to reduce trout limits, which went from, in the 15 years I've been doing this, it was 15 fish, then it was 10, and now it's 5, and there's maybe 3
Three in
or
cases,
yeah,
right?
3.
Yep, I believe so.
But I go back to this. I get it if you want to have a fish fry and invite everyone over. And if you go to the coast and you want to spend money to go fishing with a guide or just take your own boat or whatever, that's expensive. And
Yep.
so a lot of people want to keep as many fish as they can. I am not going to lie. I have thrown out fish that has been freezer burned when I've gone out and caught 25 crappie.
Everybody's done it.
Right.
Yep.
And I feel bad when that happens. I don't want to do that. So to me, it's like, give me 5 or 6, enough to feed the family. I'm happy. 3 nice trout feeds my family. I could care less. And I'm not saying, I have a problem with anyone keeping their legal limit. I don't. Like, do what you want to do. But we've all, like you just said, we've all done that.
Yeah.
And so these limits are, especially with a crappie, I mean, that's 25 fish is a lot. But the fisheries are being managed to the point where that's fine. So,
Absolutely. And that brings up, I guess, another good take home point that I guess I didn't hit on yet is, our regulations for crappie right now. The philosophy, our management strategy for crappie around the state is to sustain angler harvest. Period. Our regulations are set to have stable populations with consistent ability to harvest fish year over year. We don't have regulations set in place to say promote or sustain trophy crappie fisheries, and we don't have regulations set in place to manage for say crazy high catch rates or anything else. At the end of the day, our focus with those regulations is just to maintain or sustain ample harvest of crappie. And again, back at our growth rates, mortality rates, everything else, those regulations fit really well for 95% plus of our lakes in the entire state.
mm-hmm. Well, we appreciate it, Jake. You guys do a great job. Like I said, I think you said your goal as an organization is angler opportunity.
Yep.
How can we make the fishing experience? And that means catching fish, right? I mean, nobody wants to just go sit on the lake. It's better than
No,
sitting at work, right? I mean, some might
it,
say,
it
well, that
is,
sounds
but
like a great day. But at the end of the day, people want to catch fish. You guys do a great job, and continue to make that your primary focus is the angler experience in Texas. And I think it's a damn good one. So thanks for all you guys do. And thanks for discussing these findings of this recent project. If folks want to look at want to look at it more in depth, can they find that? Is it
There's
available?
a few different ways. So the published article itself, it's available actually through the North American Journal of Fisheries Management. It does actually require a subscription to read that, so it's a little bit more challenging. Truthfully, if folks want to look at it or have more questions, that they can reach out to me directly, and I can usually line them up or talk about it in any
Mm,
depth they want to. We've had some information published on social medias or this and that, and truthfully, podcasts and information that you put out is just as helpful to really summarize what it is we're finding and what we're doing.
yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Jake. I look forward to our next discussion somewhere on down the road.
Likewise,
All
appreciate
right.
it.
Good luck this spring.
Thanks. Take care.